Imagine your family preparing your final meal, not as a metaphor, literally. This is happening in the mountains of New Guinea just 70 years ago, and what they're about to offer you will change the science of the human brain forever. But the real answer is far stranger than it first appears. You stand among the Fore people. This is a small community in the highlands of Papua New Guinea. Your ancestors buried their dead in the ground for centuries. But in the early 20th century, the tradition changed. A deceased relative is now cooked and eaten by their own family. This isn't cruelty. This is love. You give the body of the deceased a final tribute by absorbing them into yourself. Women and children receive the brain. Men receive the muscle tissue. This is how the food of love and grief was divided. And around that same time, something inexplicable begins happening in the Fore villages. First, a person loses their balance while walking. Then a tremor starts in the hands. Then comes uncontrollable laughter that has nothing to do with joy. The Fore call this disease Kuru. In their language, it means to shiver from fear or cold. A year after the first symptoms, the person can no longer walk. A few months later, they die. By the 1950s, Kuru has claimed thousands of Fore lives. In some villages, women die in such numbers that there are 10 men for every woman. The society stands on the edge of extinction. What is happening to your people? Scientists arrive to investigate. One of them is a young American physician named Carleton Gadusek. He settles among the Fore and begins collecting data. He notices a strange pattern. Kuru mostly strikes women and children. Men almost never get sick. Why? Gadusek runs through one theory after another. Genetics? A curse? Plant poisoning? Nothing fits perfectly. But a local researcher, anthropologist Robert Glass, along with his colleague Shirley Lindenbaum, noticed something else. Kuru's distribution doesn't match genes or poison. It matches the funeral ritual. Women and children eat the brain. Men eat the muscle. And the brain, as it turns out, carries the highest concentration of the disease's cause. Your body cannot tell the difference between an act of love and a fatal mistake. Gadusek and his colleague, physician Michael Alpers, decide to test the hypothesis directly. They inject chimpanzees with brain tissue from people who died of Kuru. Months pass. The chimps stay healthy. Almost 2 years pass. And then the chimp's hands begin to tremble. The incubation period turns out to be frighteningly long. Sometimes decades. This discovery earns Gadusek the Nobel Prize in 1976. But the central question remains unanswered. What kind of pathogen can kill years later while being neither a bacterium nor a virus? This is where another scientist enters the story, Stanley Prusiner. He studies a similar disease in sheep called scrapie, along with a rare human illness known as Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease. Prusiner discovers something that contradicts every biological law you were taught in school. The pathogen contains no DNA, no RNA. It's just a protein, a misfolded protein. Picture a paper airplane. Folded correctly, it flies. Folded slightly wrong, it becomes a crumpled ball of paper. A prion is a protein that has lost its correct shape. And the most terrifying property of a prion is its ability to convince neighboring healthy proteins to fold incorrectly too. One corrupted protein triggers a chain reaction. Over months, sometimes years, the brain turns into something resembling a sponge. That's where the scientific name for this group of diseases comes from. Spongiform encephalopathy. You don't get infected by a virus. You get infected by a shape. Prusiner also receives a Nobel Prize for this discovery in 1997. Science, which had never before encountered a pathogen without genetic material, is forced to rewrite its textbooks. But let's return to the Fore. When the Australian administration banned funeral cannibalism in the 1960s, something telling happened. The number of new Kuru cases began to decline. Not immediately. The long incubation period meant people infected before the ban kept getting sick for decades afterward. The last recorded Kuru case among the Fore dates all the way to the 2000s. That person most likely ate infected tissue as a child, half a century before symptoms appeared. Sit with that for a second. Half a century. Your body can carry a hidden threat longer than your entire career, your entire family life, your whole adulthood. And you would never know until it's too late. The story of Kuru isn't just a tale about an isolated tribe on the other side of the world. It's the first proof that cannibalism, even ritual cannibalism, even performed out of love and respect, can destroy an entire society from within through an invisible enemy that can't be seen under an ordinary microscope or recognized by any familiar method. And this same mechanism turned out to be much closer to you than it seems. In the 1980s and 1990s, Britain experienced the mad cow disease outbreak. Authorities eventually had to admit that cattle were being fed processed remains of other animals. Cows were, quite literally, eating cows, and years later, people who had eaten the contaminated beef began developing a new variant of Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, the same prion catastrophe that killed the Fore, only this time it arrived through ground beef from a supermarket shelf. You never ate human brain in a funeral ritual. But the rule turned out to be universal for any species that starts, quite literally, eating itself. Today, the Fore no longer practice funeral cannibalism. Kuru has essentially disappeared. But researchers, including Michael Alpers, kept monitoring survivors well into recent years because some Fore people carried an unexpected protective mechanism, a genetic mutation that appears to have emerged and spread specifically in response to the Kuru epidemic. Natural selection, playing out in real time within a single generation. Your brain, however unique it may seem, follows the same physical rules as a sheet of paper folded the wrong way. The only difference is that paper can be unfolded again. A protein cannot. If a hidden truth like this changes the way you see your own body, that's exactly the kind of thing this channel exists for. Subscribe, and the next hidden truth will find you before you even go looking for it. So the next time you hear the word cannibalism, don't think of horror movies or the primitive savagery you were told about as a child. Think of the Fore. Think of Godusek and Prisoner. Think of the fact that your own body carries rules so ancient and so fragile that a single misfolded protein can bring them crashing down after half a century of silence. And then, perhaps, you'll understand, the final meal your family could have prepared for you out of love would have been the quietest, slowest killer that ever existed.